The Ethiopian Bible is the oldest Bible.
Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose from the grave. A groundbreaking archaeological discovery seems to confirm the biblical narrative found in the Gospels.
In 1773, deep in the Ethiopian highlands, a Scottish explorer uncovered a Bible that the Western world had tried to forget. Ancient manuscripts older than any in Rome, hiding stories of fallen angels, giants, and a flood that nearly destroyed humanity.
The Bible story of Noah. It includes a massive flood that destroys the earth and instructions that animals should be loaded onto the craft 2 by 2.
15 books erased from the Bible we know, preserved only here. Why were these texts hidden for centuries? What forbidden truths were the early church desperate to erase? What he found could shake the very foundations of Christianity, and the secrets it reveals have been waiting, silent, for over a millennium. The Scottish Explorer and the Lost Book. James Bruce of Kinnaird was born on December 14, 1730, to a noble Scottish family descended from King Robert the Bruce. He studied Arabic and Ge'ez at the Escorial in Spain, became fascinated with Oriental manuscripts, and in June 1768 set out from Alexandria on what would become a legendary expedition. His official goal was to discover the source of the Nile. His unofficial goal was far more ambitious. Bruce knew that Ethiopia possessed texts that had vanished from the rest of Christendom. Since the 16th century, European scholars had tried and failed to acquire them. Portuguese missionaries had reported seeing the Book of Enoch in Ethiopian monasteries, but every attempt to bring copies back to Europe had ended in failure. The text had been lost to Western Christianity and Judaism for 4 centuries. Bruce was determined to succeed where others had not. He arrived in Gondar, the Ethiopian capital, on February 14, 1770, and was received by Emperor Tekle Haymanot II and the real power behind the throne, Ras Mikael Sehul. Bruce became a fixture at court. He practiced medicine, fought in battles alongside Ethiopian forces, attended an Ethiopian wedding, and gained access to religious texts that no European had seen in centuries. When he finally departed, he carried not 1 but 3 complete copies of the Book of Enoch. The journey home nearly killed him. He was detained at Al-Qadarif by a hostile governor named Fidele until diplomacy and a show of force secured his release. He was held hostage again in Sennar, where thieves attacked his house, acting with the knowledge of King Ismail. Crossing the desert east of the Nile, he found the corpses of an entire caravan that had been waylaid and murdered by local tribesmen. On November 29, 1772, he reached Aswan, then returned to the desert to recover his journals and baggage after all his camels died. He reached Cairo in January 1773 and Paris 2 months later. In 1821, Richard Lawrence, a professor of Hebrew at Oxford, produced the first English translation from Bruce's manuscripts. For the first time in over a millennium, Western readers could access a text that had shaped early Christianity, but had been erased from the official canon. Fragments of 10 additional Enoch manuscripts were later found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran.
Biblical scroll fragments have now been excavated from caves in the Judean desert during an extremely dangerous rescue operation. In addition to these Bible fragments,
confirming that this was not an Ethiopian invention. The Book of Enoch was back, and it changed everything scholars thought they knew about early Jewish and Christian thought. But Bruce had only scratched the surface. Ethiopia preserved far more than just Enoch, and the manuscripts he brought back were copies made centuries after the originals. The truly ancient texts still lay hidden in mountain monasteries, waiting to be discovered. The world's oldest illustrated Bible. In 1950, a British traveler named Beatrice Plain visited the Abba Garima Monastery in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. The monastery sits at 7,000 feet elevation, clinging to cliffs in a remote highland accessible only by hiking and climbing. Plain asked to see the monastery's treasures. The monks showed her illuminated manuscripts with ornamental headings that she described as Syrian in style. She assumed they dated to perhaps the 11th century. She was wrong by at least 500 years. In 2000, the Ethiopian Heritage Fund arranged for fragments of these manuscripts to be carbon dated at Oxford University's Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit.
Radiocarbon Laboratory here at GNS Science. This is the sample preparation laboratory for radiocarbon dating, and today we're going to show you a little bit about how radiocarbon dating is done.
The results were extraordinary. Garima II, the earlier of the two main Gospel books, dated to between 390 and 570 AD. Garima I dated to between 530 and 660 AD. This means these manuscripts were produced during the late Roman period, possibly before the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD that split Eastern and Western Christianity. The Garima Gospels are now recognized as the oldest complete illustrated Christian manuscripts in existence. They predate the famous Rabula Gospels from Syria, which were explicitly dated to 586 AD and had previously been considered the oldest. The colors in the Garima Gospels remain vivid after 15 centuries. The evangelist portraits still show Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John with remarkable detail. The book covers, possibly original to the manuscripts, may be the oldest book bindings still attached to their original pages anywhere in the world. According to monastic tradition, the manuscripts were created by Abba Garima himself, one of the 9 saints, who came from Syria or Constantinople in the 5th century to evangelize rural Ethiopia. Legend says God stopped the sun from setting so that Garima could complete copying the Gospels in a single day. Whether or not you believe the legend, the carbon dating confirms that these manuscripts were produced during the lifetime attributed to Abba Garima. The monks were telling the truth. Blair Priday of the Ethiopian Heritage Fund described the challenges of preserving these texts.
Priests and lay worshippers in Ethiopia are on a mission to replicate or even recreate centuries-old religious manuscripts and sacred artwork in efforts to preserve traditions and heritage.
The pages had been crudely stitched together during a 1960s restoration attempt. Some pages would not even turn. The manuscripts were falling apart. But the underlying text remained legible because the monks had kept them high and dry in the mountains, stored in darkness that preserved the colors for 15 centuries. The Garima Gospels survived Muslim invasions that surrounded Ethiopia for centuries. They survived the devastating wars. With Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi in the 16th century, whose forces burned churches and manuscripts across the highlands. They survived Italian occupation in the 1890s. They survived a fire around 1930 that destroyed the monastery church itself. And they survived to rewrite history, proving that Ethiopia possessed Christian texts older than anything in Europe. The buried church that changed everything. In 2009, archaeologists spoke with local residents near the ancient city of Aksum. The villagers mentioned a hill near the modern village of Edaga Rabu that might contain ancient ruins. The archaeologists investigated. What they found would provide the earliest physical evidence of Christianity in sub-Saharan Africa. The site was called Beta Samati, meaning house of audience in the local Tigrinya language. Between 2011 and 2016, an international team led by Michael Harrower of Johns Hopkins University conducted systematic excavations. They uncovered a buried town that had been occupied for over 1,400 years, from around 750 BC through approximately 650 AD. And within that town, they found the remains of a 4th century Christian church. The basilica measured 60 feet long and 40 feet wide, built in the Roman style that Christians adopted for their places of worship. Radiocarbon dating confirmed it was constructed around the same time that Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in Rome in 313 AD and converted on his deathbed in 337 AD. Aaron Butts, a professor of Semitic and Egyptian languages at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., called it the earliest physical evidence for a church in Ethiopia and all of sub-Saharan Africa. It is reliable evidence for a Christian presence at a very early date. Inside and around the church, archaeologists discovered remarkable artifacts. A gold and carnelian intaglio ring showing Roman influences. A stone pendant decorated with a cross and inscribed with the ancient Ge'ez word for venerable. Incense burners. Stamp seals and tokens used for economic transactions, a glass bead from the Eastern Mediterranean, large quantities of pottery from Aqaba in modern Jordan. These finds demonstrated that Beta Samati was a cosmopolitan hub of international trade, connected by commerce to the wider Christian world nearly 3,000 miles from Rome. Helena Woldekouros, an archaeologist at Washington University in St. Louis who participated in the excavation, concluded that long-distance trade routes played a significant role in the introduction of Christianity in Ethiopia. The faith did not spread through conquest or imperial decree. It spread through merchants, travelers, and the networks of commerce that connected the Aksumite kingdom to the Mediterranean world. This matters because it means Ethiopian Christianity developed in parallel with Roman Christianity, not as a derivative of it. When the Council of Nicaea met in 325 AD to standardize Christian doctrine, Ethiopia was already building churches. When Roman authorities decided which books belonged in the Bible and which should be destroyed, Ethiopian Christians made their own decisions, and they kept texts that Rome rejected. The shipwrecked boys who changed a kingdom. The story of how Ethiopia became Christian begins with a shipwreck. In the early 4th century, a merchant ship from Tyre, carrying 2 young Syrian boys named Frumentius and Aedesius, was attacked on the Red Sea coast near the port of Adulis. The crew was killed, but the boys survived and were brought to the royal court at Aksum, where they rose to positions of influence. Frumentius became the tutor and advisor to the young prince Ezana. When King Usanas died around 320 AD, Ezana was still a child. His mother Sophia ruled as regent while Frumentius educated the future king in matters of governance and faith. Frumentius must have made a profound impression. He began encouraging Christian merchants in Aksum to be bold and open about their religion, assembling liturgies for their worship. Around 330 AD, Frumentius traveled to Alexandria to meet Athanasius, one of the most influential theologians in early Christianity and a fierce defender of Nicene orthodoxy. Frumentius asked Athanasius to send a bishop to Ethiopia to establish the church there. Athanasius listened patiently to the account of Ezana's conversion and decided that no one was better suited for the task than Frumentius himself. He ordained Frumentius as bishop and sent him back to Aksum with full authority to build the Ethiopian church. King Ezana converted to Christianity between 330 and 340 AD, making Aksum one of the earliest kingdoms in the world to adopt the faith as its official religion.
Aksum is also a Christian holy site. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church continues to follow early Christian teachings, practices, and traditions.
The evidence for this conversion is literally written in stone. Ezana's early inscriptions invoke pagan deities like Marem, Beher, and Medir. His later inscriptions invoke the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. His coins show the same transition. Early coins display the disk and crescent of pagan worship. Later coins display the cross. This is documented archaeological evidence of a king converting an empire. Frumentius established the first church in the city of Aksum, called St. Mary of Zion. This church, rebuilt multiple times over the centuries, holds a special place in Ethiopian Christianity. It was here that future emperors came to be crowned, and it is here, according to Ethiopian tradition, that the Ark of the Covenant is kept. Frumentius also established the first monastery in Ethiopia, a series of cells carved into sheer cliff faces that holds the reputation of the world's most inaccessible monastery. The Ethiopians call Frumentius by many names: Abuna, meaning our father, Abba Salama, meaning father of peace, and Kesati Birhan, meaning revealer of light. He died around 383 AD. Both he and Ezana are revered as saints in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The massive Ezana stele of Aksum, a single slab of granite fashioned into an obelisk towering 69 feet over. The surrounding countryside marks where King Ezana's body is believed to rest. The foundations they laid would prove remarkably durable. After the fall of Byzantine North Africa to Muslim armies in the 7th century, Ethiopia became the only Christian kingdom on the African continent. Surrounded by Islamic powers, cut off from the rest of Christendom, Ethiopian Christianity developed along its own trajectory for over 1,000 years. And in that isolation, it preserved texts that the rest of the world forgot. The books Rome tried to destroy. The Ethiopian Bible contains 81 books in its narrower canon, and up to 88 in its broader tradition. Compare this to the 66 books in Protestant Bibles or the 73 in Catholic Bibles. The difference is not trivial. It represents fundamentally different understandings of what counts as sacred scripture. The most famous of these additional texts is the Book of Enoch, properly called First Enoch. This is not some obscure document of uncertain provenance. It is quoted directly in the New Testament. The Epistle of Jude, verses 14 and 15, attributes prophecy to Enoch the seventh from Adam and uses language that matches almost word for word with 1 Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9. Early church fathers, including Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Athenagoras, referenced it as authoritative. For centuries, it shaped how Christians understood angels, demons, and the origin of evil. Then it was suppressed. By the 5th century, the Book of Enoch was excluded from most Christian biblical canons. Copies were destroyed. The text survived only in fragments until James Bruce brought complete manuscripts back from Ethiopia in 1773. And even then, it was decades before an English translation became available. What made Enoch so dangerous? The Book of the Watchers, the first section of 1 Enoch, tells a disturbing story. 200 angels called Watchers descended to earth on Mount Hermon and made a pact to take human wives. Their leader was Semyaza. Their offspring were the Nephilim, giants of tremendous violence who devoured everything humans produced and eventually began devouring humans themselves. The text describes giants 3,000 cubits high, but the Watchers did more than breed with humanity. They taught forbidden knowledge. An angel named Azazel taught humans to forge weapons and make ornaments. Others taught astrology, sorcery, the cutting of roots, and the reading of celestial signs. The text portrays human civilization as corrupted at its foundation by angelic rebellion. Technology itself carries the taint of cosmic sin. This was not compatible with the theology Rome wanted to promote. It suggested that evil originated not with human sin alone, but with cosmic forces beyond human control. It raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of creation itself, and it contained detailed astronomical information and a solar calendar that differed from the lunar calendar adopted by mainstream Judaism and later Christianity. In 1947, Bedouin shepherds discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in caves near Qumran.
The Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. removed 5 items previously displayed as fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls after an embarrassing discovery.
Among the approximately 800 manuscripts found between 1947 and 1956 were fragments of 11 different copies of 1 Enoch, all written in Aramaic, and all discovered in Cave 4. 9 additional Aramaic manuscripts of the Book of Giants, a related text not included in the Ethiopian collection, were also found. Multiple copies of the Book of Jubilees, another text preserved primarily in Ethiopia, appeared at Qumran as well. These texts were not marginal.
Now, this is quite a discovery. Fragments of a biblical scroll, along with other relics, have been found in desert caves in Israel. Dozens of pieces of parchment were written in Greek.
They were central to at least some Jewish communities in the centuries before Christ. Then they vanished from mainstream Judaism and Christianity everywhere except Ethiopia. The Book of Jubilees, sometimes called the Little Genesis, presented different challenges. It retells the stories of Genesis, but adds significant details and introduces a solar calendar that differs from the lunar calendar. Calendar disputes were not trivial. They determined when holy days were celebrated. A different calendar meant a different rhythm of religious life, a different way of organizing time itself. The Great Schism and the Road. Less traveled in 451 AD, 500 bishops gathered at the Council of Chalcedon near Constantinople. Their task was to settle a question that had divided Christianity for decades. How should we understand the nature of Christ? Was he fully divine? Fully human? Both? And if both, how did those two natures relate to each other? The council produced what became known as the Chalcedonian definition. Christ is acknowledged in two natures without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. Two natures, divine and human, united in one person. This formula became the orthodox position for what would become the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. But around 500 bishops in the patriarchates of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem refused to accept this definition. They held that Christ has one united nature, fully divine and fully human, but not two separate natures existing in parallel. This position is called miaphysitism, from the Greek for one nature. The churches that rejected Chalcedon became known as the Oriental Orthodox churches, and they include the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. The word Tewahedo itself is ge'ez, for being made one or unified, referring to this theological position. Ethiopian Christians believe that Christ's divinity parted not from his humanity, not for a single moment nor a twinkling of an eye. This is not the same as saying Christ was only divine, which would be the heresy of monophysitism. The Ethiopian position is more subtle. The two natures are perfectly united, not mixed or confused, but also not separable. Some scholars believe the 9 saints who evangelized rural Ethiopia in the 5th century fled persecution by the Byzantine Empire after the Council of Chalcedon. They brought with them not just faith, but a particular understanding of that faith, one that Constantinople had rejected. Ethiopia became a refuge for this version of Christianity, isolated from the debates and councils that shaped the Western Church. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is now the largest of the Oriental Orthodox churches, with between 36 and 51 million members. It maintains practices that connect directly to the earliest centuries of Christianity. Worship in the ancient ge'ez language, extensive fasting that makes it the most austere fasting tradition in any church, with 180 mandatory fasting days for lay people and up to 252 for clergy. Devout Ethiopian Orthodox Christians fast on every Wednesday and Friday throughout the year, abstaining from all animal products including meat, dairy, and eggs, and eating only one meal after 3 in the afternoon. This is Christianity, as it was practiced before Rome finished standardizing the faith. Ethiopia, faith carved in stone. Ethiopian Christianity isn't just an ancient faith preserved in manuscripts. It's carved into the earth itself. And the story of how it got there reveals why this nation became unconquerable. In the 12th century, when Muslim conquests made pilgrimages to the Holy Land nearly impossible, King Lalibela had a vision. He would build a new Jerusalem in the Ethiopian highlands. According to legend, Christ himself guided him on a tour of Jerusalem and instructed him to recreate it. What he built defies explanation. At 8,000 feet elevation, his craftsmen carved 11 churches directly out of solid volcanic rock.
In Lalibela, the faith is as strong as it was more than 900 years ago when these churches were carved out of solid rock.
Not built from stone blocks, carved downward into the earth, each one a monolithic structure with no joints or seams. The largest, Biete Medhani Alem, is the largest monolithic church in the world. Legend says men worked by day, angels by night, completing everything in 24 years. The engineering is staggering. Every cut had to be precise. You cannot fix mistakes when carving into bedrock. The layout mirrors the Holy Land itself. A trench called the River Jordan runs through the site. Inside Bieta Golgotha, there are replicas of the tomb of Christ and the tomb of Adam. UNESCO designated these churches a World Heritage Site in 1978. They remain active places of worship. This is not dead history. This is living faith. But Lalibela's New Jerusalem was built on an even older foundation. Ethiopian tradition claims a connection to Israel that predates the apostles by 1,000 years. The Kebra Nagast records how the queen of Sheba, called Makeda, visited King Solomon and bore him a son named Menelik. When Menelik later journeyed to Jerusalem, the Israelite nobles who accompanied him secretly took the Ark of the Covenant. By the time Solomon discovered the theft, Menelik was beyond pursuit. The Ark had come to Ethiopia. Today, Ethiopians claim the Ark rests in a chapel in Aksum. A single monk guards it for life. He cannot leave. He cannot show it to anyone, not to scholars, not to tourists, not even to the patriarch of the Ethiopian Church. When he dies, his successor takes his place, continuing an unbroken chain stretching back 3,000 years. This heritage shaped Ethiopian identity. The Solomonic dynasty ruled from 1270 until 1974, claiming descent from Solomon and Sheba. They preserved their scriptures as sacred trust, and they resisted every attempt by outside powers to take their land. That resistance was tested on March 1, 1896. Ethiopian forces under Emperor Menelik II faced 14,000 Italian troops at the Battle of Adwa. Menelik had assembled 100,000 warriors with modern rifles. By nightfall, the Italians were in full retreat. Over 6,000 killed, nearly 4,000 captured. It was the first time an African force decisively defeated a European colonial army. The victory made Ethiopia one of only 2 African countries never colonized. When Mussolini invaded in 1935 with chemical weapons, Ethiopian resistance continued until they expelled the Italians in 1941. Ethiopia's independence is inseparable from its faith. The people who carved 11 churches from solid rock, who guard the Ark of the Covenant, who preserved scriptures Rome tried to destroy, also preserved their freedom. The nation that kept the forbidden books kept itself. What this means for you. The Ethiopian Bible is not a curiosity for scholars. It is a challenge to every assumption you have about how the Bible came to exist. The 66 books in your Bible were selected by human beings with political and theological agendas. They met in councils, debated which texts were authentic, and made decisions that shaped Christianity for 2,000 years. But they were not the only Christians making these decisions. Ethiopian Christians made different choices. They kept texts that Rome rejected, and those texts survived in mountain monasteries for 15 centuries, waiting for the rest of the world to rediscover them. The Book of Enoch was widely read when the New Testament was being written. 11 copies were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, more than some books that made it into the Protestant Old Testament. It shaped how early Christians understood angels, demons, and the end times. It is quoted in the Epistle of Jude. Early church fathers cited it as authoritative. Then it was erased. For over 1,000 years, Western Christians had no idea it had ever existed. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 confirmed that these texts were not Ethiopian inventions. The Garima Gospels prove that Ethiopian Christianity possessed manuscripts older than anything in Europe. The Beta Samati excavation proves that Ethiopian churches existed in the 4th century, built at the same time Christianity was spreading through the Roman Empire. This was not a derivative tradition receiving second-hand teaching from Rome. This was a parallel development, connected by trade and travel, but making its own decisions about scripture and worship. When you read the Book of Enoch, you encounter ideas that were circulating when the apostles were alive. You see the intellectual context that shaped early Christianity. You discover questions they were asking, problems they were wrestling with, answers they were proposing. These texts are not heretical nonsense. They are windows into the early Christian mind. And so, the Ethiopian highlands guard their secret still. Centuries of silence, erasure, and forgotten stories have not extinguished the truths hidden in those ancient manuscripts. What other histories, what other revelations are waiting in shadowed corners of the world just beyond our reach? And more importantly, if the world's most powerful authorities once tried to bury them, what might they reveal when finally unearthed?